Alright, hello and welcome to the Spirent Test Center tutorial. This particular video, we're going to focus on how you can use Spirent to simulate either real DHCP clients that are going to actively go through the DORA process, which is discover, offer, request, and act, or can send leaves, binds, renews, etc. Or we're also going to show you how you can set up Spirent to act as an actual DHCP server, and maybe you can have your switcher router do a DHCP relay. So typical use cases here for this are obviously if you need to test any sort of DHCP server or DHCP relay settings, this is a great way to do it, being we'll have that upper layer protocol negotiation. Or if you just want to try to better simulate legitimate client traffic, where there's hosts that can populate things like dynamic ARP inspection or check to make sure DHCP snooping and trust statements are working properly. So lots of different use cases where we actually need the higher level protocols to be operating correctly. So let's go ahead and look at how our demo is going to be set up here. I've got two IXIA ports. The first one is going to be, or excuse me, two Spirent ports. The first one is on port 101, the other is 102, and I also have show IP DHCP binding. I've got a very simple DHCP server configured on VLAN 10, and so we'll get hosts to act as DHCP clients with the switch, and then we'll show you how you could set up that server. Now in my background, I've got the Spirent ports that have been given to me by Kalo. Generally speaking, these are going to come in pairs. So this is slot 2, port 1 and 2, as well as slot 1, port 3 and 4. Now this particular example, I'll be using one port from each of these pairs, but generally speaking, you'll just use both ports from the same pair. It's also important in this output, make sure you highlight or copy the actual chassis IP that is associated with these two ports. In this example, both ports 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 are both on the same chassis, this 172.18.120.38. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go over to my remote desktop for the Spirent Test Center. Now there's a couple different icons we could see here that we're going to be using, specifically the ones in blue, but we could see we have version 4.69, 4.0, as well as 3.62. So usually it's a good practice, just go to your web browser on the VM and just put in the very top bar here, put in the IP address of the server that you're looking to connect to. Just normal HTTP is fine, and then we can see that this particular server is using 4.69. So if you don't have that located on your virtual machine, you can click this button right here in order to download it. But now that I know that I've got the right version, I'll just go ahead and double click this, and that'll start the Spirent Test Center application loading. Now, for this, we're going to break this video into two parts. One is just the client example using the switch as a server, and then I will remove the server config and add in a relay function and then show you how we can get the clients to get relayed through our switch and then have Spirent act as the DHCP server. So starting off for this kind of quick start guide, we're going to go ahead and close that out. And I'm going to click the first button here, connect to chassis and reserve ports. Now I've already got my chassis here, but if this is empty for you, just go ahead and click this first button, then the first option, connect to physical or virtual chassis, and then put in the IP address that was pulled from Kalo. And once we load it up, you should be able to navigate through all of the different modules. Now in this case, we could see there is also some basic CDP interpretation. So it's already reading that this particular port is connected to Spirent Demo, which is the host name of my switch, on port 101. So I'm going to go ahead and select port 3 and 4. Generally speaking, these are going to be in pairs, the way Kalo has it set up. And then I'm also going to have over on slot 2, this will be ports 1 and 2. So I'll select this one and this one. And with my ports assigned to me now, yep, okay, with my ports, now I'll be able to hit OK. And Spirent will now go to connect to those interfaces. It'll generally take about 10 to 20 seconds. And once complete, all these windows will go away, and I'll see a green light for any interface I'm actively able to configure. So the first thing I want to do is set up some of my DHCP clients. So I'm going to pick the port I want to act as my client example. So that's going to be port 13. which is going to be connected to TE101 here. So this is going to be an access layer port, so pretty simple initial config. I'm going to right click and add a device. Actually, the better example probably, I apologize, would be to use this top option here. This is going to allow you to go through the wizard, which is good if you're new to Spirent. And I'm going to make sure that only port 13 is selected. That's the one I want to create the clients on. And I'm going to unselect, instead of doing the none, which is the default, I'm going to select access. And then I'm going to mouse over the DHCP v4 here. I'm going to make sure that that is enabled. That now tells Spirent I want to make sure that this is a DHCP client that has that upper layer negotiation. So hitting next, this will be an IPv4 based client because I picked DHCP v4, not v6. It's also an access layer port, so I do not have any reason to add a .1q header. But if you need to do this for a trunk, you simply just need to select this option and configure the VLAN later on. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and make it just access. I can now tell Spirent how many clients do I want this to simulate. So we'll just keep it simple and we'll start off with 100 devices off of this one interface. The default gateway, in the event it is not set by my DHCP server, will be 10.10.10.1, which is the running config for showrunit VLAN 10. There we go. So that's the IP address I own. And I'm going to just accept the default MAC. And I'm going to remark my TOS and diff serve to 0, so all the traffic uses DSCP 0. All the other settings should be perfectly fine to leave as is. I'm going to select next, and if for some reason I need to have my client opt for either a certain option or I want it to pay attention to a certain field or a request, etc., all this is configurable within the checkboxes here. Again, defaults will be more than enough just to get you up and running. Now, in the final slide, this is the preview. It's going to show me the source MAC of all the clients and what their gateway should be in the event they don't get one. We don't know what the IP address is going to be. That's going to be handed out by the switch, so that part is blank. And once I see that everything is to my liking, I'm going to go ahead and hit finish, and it now creates this client. Now, in order to start this DHCP transaction, it's very simple. We'll go ahead and let's do show IP DHCP binding, make sure that that is empty. And then if we look, there are multiple tabs up at the top within, this is all within the devices list. And there is one now dedicated for DHCP. And we could see the device count here is right now set to 100. It is active, but it is sitting idle, meaning we are not sending any DHCP traffic. So to start this off, I simply need to right-click it. And in the menu that appears, there is a DHCP option. And I could select Bind DHCP Device. And the Spirent will now start programming the interfaces that I've selected. That's what we see here. And as soon as this is complete, it'll bring me to the interface statistics page where I'll be able to see what sort of I/O rates are across my various interfaces. So here we go. So now port 13, I could see that there are frames that are being transmitted, some that are received, and already it's completed the DHCP process. I can see here it says bound, which means all 100 clients are able to get an IP address. If I check my binding, here we go. So I've got now all of these DHCP bindings starting with the 10.2 IP address going all the way to 101. So that's 100 active clients. Now, for some reason, I want these clients to leave or renew or something else. We could right-click this, go back down to DHCP, and we could see there are lots of options. I could release, rebind, renew, reboot, etc. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and release all of my DHCP. We can see here it goes releasing and then to idle. And my TX count increased as all these clients should have sent a release. Let's look at our binding. All right, and we are back down to 0. So now what happens if I want to use the switch as, say, a relay agent and have the Spirent act as my DHCP server instead of my Cisco device? So let's go ahead. I'm going to do interface VLAN 10, and I'm going to point it to a relay agent out VLAN 20, which my relay agent here needs to be in that particular subnet. So I'm going to configure a helper address of 20.20.20.2. And I'm also going to say no IP DHCP pool VLAN 10. That was the name of my DHCP pool. So now the switch should be relaying all DHCP discovers, offers, relays, requests, and acknowledgement, and should not be handing anything out locally. I've still got my clients created, so I'm going to leave those as is. I'm going to hop over to port 2 here, and I'm going to create my server on this other interface. And this will be on VLAN 20, so it needs to have a different IP address. So first thing I'm going to do is click Devices, and then in the Devices window here, I'll just go ahead for my emulated devices, hit Add, make sure the port I want is selected, and we still have the access selected from last time. I'm going to unselect DHCP-v4, and I'm going to make sure DHCP-v4 server is selected. So instead of a client, we're now going to act as the server. I'm going to hit Next. This will be an IPv4 host, and again, if I need to add a .1q tag for a trunk, I could do that here, but this is all access, so I'll accept the default. Now, I don't want to have 100 unique DHCP servers. Instead, I just want one server. So I'll put the devices per port down to 1. My starting IP for this one client will be 20.20.20.2/24 with .1 as the gateway. I can now hit Next. There's no other options specific to this server. By default, it'll just start handing out in its own particular subnet, which is not necessarily a good thing, knowing that all my clients are in a different subnet. So I'm going to accept the defaults as it is and hit Finish. And now we should have a tab for DHCP server on the DHCP server side. And we can see that there are some configurable options that were not seen before that I can edit if I want. So we can see the lease time right now is currently set to 3,600 seconds. And I can modify this, just double click it and it becomes editable. My renewal time should happen at 50% of the lease interval. And then if we go a little bit over, we can see various other settings that I can configure. Now the pool address start is going to be right here. So in this case, I don't want this address to be handed out in VLAN 20. I want it to be VLAN 10. So I want my pool address start to be 10.10.10 dot, let's say 2, because the switch will own the .1. If for some reason I wanted to create a custom pool, which I'm doing, I'll make sure that that's selected. My hosts will be handed out from this pool in increments of 1. And if we go over, we can see that there's really no other settings that I really care about for this period of time. If we want, we can hand out additional information, DNS servers, etc. But for now, I'm just going to be setting up just a basic server just to get things started. Now, once I have everything set up the way I want, I can now right-click this, and down on DHCP server, it'll say Start Server. And I should see this state turn from not started to started. There we go, or up. All right, so now the server is up, and we should be able to see, I believe we have a count. It's going to be total, that is not current. So let's go ahead and we'll pop back over to emulated devices, go over to our clients, and now I want to right click these clients, and we should have, got to make sure DHCP is selected. There we go. So now within DHCP, I could right click the clients, DHCP option, and I can bind DHCP. And once again, these clients I'll be able to see in my total TX and RX, and now the TX and RX is also incremented on this server, and we can see the clients are discovering and they are actively trying to bind. Now, one of the problems we might need to keep in mind with Spirent is if this fails, usually it's because of some sort of connectivity issue. Generally speaking, Spirent treats ARP and some of our other processes separately. So one of the things we may need to do is hop over to the device here, make sure it is, that's going to be, there we go. Hop over to our emulated device here and make sure that ARP is resolved for our gateway. So if I start ARP, and we don't need to worry about our validation errors for the time being, I'll see here that as it stands, right now my client is unresolved. That's obviously not a good thing. So ARP ND, start ARP ND. Oh, there we go. I accidentally selected DHCP client. There we go. Undo that active. Okay, one more time. ARP ND. Scroll to the right. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So now my server has resolved ARP for the gateway. So any discovers that it receives, it'll now be able to respond to them, send the packet to the right unicast MAC address, and I should be all set. So the server itself now, because I had that little mix-up with our client, this is just the server. I'll go back here, and I will restart the DHCP server. Should go from that start to up. There we go. Hop back over to my devices. This uses the DHCP. And let's go ahead. It looks like since I started, they've already bound, but we'll go ahead and just release everything. We'll start this back from scratch. If at any point I want to check my interface statistics, I can click the tab down here. Let's reset all these values. Clients are now idle. Right click, DHCP, bind, and I should see now it's going to be sending out discovers. Those discovers are received by the server. It responded, so for every discover, it sent an offer. For every offer, it sent a request. For every request, it was an ACK. So 200 packets on either side here, and the clients are already bound. If I look at my show IP DHCP binding, I can see the switch is not doing any of these bindings. It is all entirely within the Spirent. It's acting as its own client and its own server. So I hope you found this demonstration useful and encourage you to take a look at some of our other demo videos. Thank you and have a good day.